Hello and welcome everyone to the Pride Jewel Spotlight video series, where we take a behind the scenes look at the making of the action film Pride Jewel by 4D Legacy Studios. The film was written and produced by Armen Dilanchian, co-produced by myself, Louise Thill, and directed by Doug Thomsen. Set in the San Francisco Bay Area, Pride Jewel is a story about an Armenian father and son who immigrate to the US in search of a better life. Now, amidst these challenges of this new life and desperate for a family, Andre turns to jewel thief Cyrus for guidance. In the end, we learn that revenge is the only way out and redemption is nowhere to be found. So today we kick off the first episode in our Spotlight series, where we will be talking about teamwork, time management, and the decision-making that went into making the film Pride Jewel. I'm very honored and excited to share with you my conversation with Doug Thomsen, the film's director and editor, and Jonathan Salazar, the film's director of photography. Let's dive right in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pride Jewel Spotlight video series, where we're going to take a deep dive look into the behind the scenes making of Pride Jewel, an action feature film by 4D Legacy Studios, written and produced by Armen Dilanchian, co-produced by myself, Louise Thill, and directed by Doug Thomsen. So today we kick off our first episode in our series, where we're going to be talking about teamwork, time management, and decision-making. And all this that went into Pride Jewel we'll talk about today. And I am excited and very honored to have as special guests, director Doug Thomsen and Jonathan Salazar, our DP. So welcome, Jonathan and Doug.
Thank you.
Hi,
Awesome.
how you doing?
Hi, Megan. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Really glad to see you guys. It's been a while since we've been able to talk about the film. So thanks for making the time to do this. And, you know, we're doing this series because we want to reach out to first-time filmmakers and give them a sense of what it took to create this feature film. This was all of our first feature film, and so thought it would be nice to share what we've learned with the world. So let's dive right in. We'll start by talking a little bit. Doug, we'll start with you and then go to Jonathan. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to this project.
Sure. Well, let's see. Going back to maybe 7th grade, iMovie came out, and I've wanted to make movies ever since. I took a little detour and worked in the advertising industry at the beginning of my career, and then said, you know, I gotta start pursuing the thing that I'm most passionate about. And so I started a little commercial production company here in the Bay Area with the goal of moving towards more and more entertainment work and feature films. And so, as you said, this is the first one that I've worked on in any capacity, actually. And yeah, I was lucky enough to direct this one. Armen, the writer and producer, we met probably 3 or 4 years ago. And, you know, he was super passionate about this project. And so we just kept in touch, and he got to know my work a little bit and then asked me to direct it.
Awesome. Great. And Jonathan, how about you?
Yeah, so I think similar to Doug, I kind of caught the bug a little, actually not too young, but yeah, in high school, I was in a video production class and had like a little video camera in my hands for the first time, and finally I feel like had a good avenue to kind of like let some creative exploration happen. And then that kind of drove me to find a film school. So I went to San Francisco State, did the cinema program there, and started freelancing in the, you know, film and video world here in the Bay Area. And yeah, it had been going well. Made my way through camera department as a camera assistant and started shooting kind of along the way. And then how I came to the project, Doug just reached out directly. He had gotten my name from some contacts here and felt that I was like a good fit to the project. So heard enough and then hopped on board.
So you two hadn't worked together before?
No.
That's correct. Yeah. And it was actually Daniel Soderbergh at Element Camera. I feel like we shout him out because
True. Yes.
he was the one who connected us. And yeah, I mean, this was like an ambitious project, fast timeline and everything. And John, in addition to having a really good reel, Jonathan asked smart, tough questions about how this is actually going to be possible. So that was one of the reasons I knew he was the guy for the job.
Excellent. Good. So there was chemistry right away, which, as you can see in the film, is evident that you worked really well together. So cool. Thanks for sharing your backgrounds. So from the trailer, and for those of us that have seen the film, it's beautiful. The shots are really beautiful. It's a really pretty film, for an action film even. And can you tell us a little bit about, one, what kind of camera and lenses did you use to get some of those shots?
You want to take
Sure,
this one?
yeah. Yeah, we ended up shooting with the Ursa Mini, the version 2 of that camera. And we had Zeiss super speeds for lenses, and the camera is Doug's. It's part of his kind of production company, and I felt like it was a solid enough camera. I I think Doug was trying to like push me to say, like, to be honest about how it wouldn't have been my first choice. And though that may be true, I do think it is a very good camera. It has like a great sensor that you can do a lot with. And so I felt like it wasn't enough of like, it's certainly not a detriment to the project. I think we got a lot of great images out of it. And yeah, I think it's like a good lesson to know that like sometimes like you can kind of make any sort of project with you can get what you want out of any camera. It's just a matter of knowing how to utilize the tools at hand.
Yeah, and on that note, Jonathan, I wanted to get your thought on this theory that I've kind of been pushing to, I don't know, people I've talked to lately, which is that when you start listing out all the different things that you have to procure or spend money on in a movie, like the camera actually ends up, the actual camera body gets pretty far down the list quickly. If you think about lenses, lighting, locations, you know, art, like props and art department, like it's just like you're saying, like there are so many cameras that are pretty capable these days. It's like lenses right off the bat will make a bigger difference, I would think.
Yeah, I think you could call it like a camera renaissance over like the digital renaissance has allowed for that. And yeah, I would say like so long as your locations can give you a lot, like you can make stuff look good. I think knowing how to utilize locations to your best ability, or like to make the locations do most of the work, will go farther than spending an extra amount of money on a more expensive camera if what you have available to you is already like something capable. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at some of those shots. I've got a few of the stills from Pride Jewel showing now. Feel free to comment on any of these guys if there's anything you want to say specifically, but just to give our viewers a chance to see what that camera was able to do. Here's one of our leads, Cyrus.
Yeah, that, I think, Jonathan, you and I talked about how that particular shot there of Cyrus just really, really took off, and is really pretty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this like goes, yeah, it's a good example of like the fact that the camera can't handle a lot, because like there's obviously a lot going on, like the highlights on his face, or like that's direct sun right there. We just, you know, we have, the camera has some internal NDs, which is great. And then, you know, we'll add whatever other filters that we need. But that just goes to show that like the dynamic range of the camera is very good. And yeah, just again, having locations do most of the work for you. Yeah.
Well, there's another example of it right here, because in that deep background is like a shipping barge or something. And those like dumpsters or whatever behind him were there, and just able to, like you're saying, like use the location as best as possible.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites.
Yeah. Stark and Sanchez. Yeah, again, another good example of like, this is like maybe like the lenses kind of coming forward as well, with getting like really lovely flares coming through trees in the background. Yeah. Yeah, maybe not too related to too much of what we've talked about, I guess, but this is just one of like my favorite frames of the film, because I feel like it captures our character Andre Sarkis, the actor, pretty well in this moment of just like of a decision that he has to make, which is
Yeah.
pretty telling. Doug, I forget how this, like, maybe we can talk a little bit about like when we choose certain shots or certain angles. Do you remember much about us coming to this one?
Well, in the movie, Andre's quote unquote friend, Alex, is laying on a couch to the left of this side of the frame. I remember we were quite pressed for time. And so this shot starts on Alex. And then as Andre walks in and sits down, it pans over. And so we kind of got our intro to the scene plus the kind of main shot of the main character all in one. And yeah, I mean, I just remember that we wanted something where Andre was, we could see him thinking, but not like up in his face, kind of a little bit more distant. And he almost never looks at Alex either, right? He's kind of always just profiling and thinking. So.
And then the infamous wedding scene.
Yes.
So without giving too much of the story away, and it maybe of some of the shots we already saw, what would you say were some of the most challenging shots to capture and why?
The first thing that comes to mind for me are the like stunts / choreography. We didn't have any like really significant stunts where people had to fall or anything like that. I mean, a little bit we did, but but not too bad. But just like getting the choreography down and especially with like adding the camera into that choreography too. Like when Andre pushes his father against the wall, we kind of walked through that maybe 10 times or something before we shot.
Yeah, and we had to like come up with like kind of a funny, but I thought like actually very simple solution, which was just creating essentially like an extension of the wall with apple boxes so that I could get the camera just past, like essentially go through the wall, like where the wall would be. And it was, I actually am pretty proud of that solution. I felt like it came up
that was the actor, right, who backed into the apple boxes?
The actor, yes, backed into the apple boxes, and then I was able to get just behind him for that moment. Yeah.
Note to self, always extra apple boxes.
Always.
You never know when you're going to need more apple boxes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we did to talk a little bit about, time management. I think Doug, you mentioned that before. Tell us a little bit about how you manage time, both, well, we'll start with preparing for the shoot. How did you kind of figure out how much time you wanted to spend on various shots and organize that maybe in just a minute or so?
Right. How did we do that? Well, we talked through every scene and had a shot list. I mean, that's obviously like fairly standard, I guess. We reviewed the schedule in super detail and just like made sure, I think we thought the sunlight would be as friendly as possible to help us as much as we could.
And then from there, it comes down to like on the day, it's a matter of how much the time is starting to like press on you. And so you start, like in certain instances, like that shot that we were talking about earlier, we decided like, oh yeah, like if we can find a way to kind of get 2 for 1, like 2 shots for 1, that's going to just help us. And it came out with like a pretty great shot out of that.
Right. And yes, I mean, knowing what shots we needed, but then also just knowing which ones were like mandatory, have to have, and which ones
priority
could get cut. Yeah. Cause I mean, I think, I would guess on maybe 50% of scenes, there was a shot that was on the shot list that we didn't end up shooting.
Okay. So being nimble enough to make some changes kind of last minute is important if needed, or God forbid something happened with cast or crew. I think in one situation, we actually had to change who was going to be in one of the shots because one of our actors was not able to be there that day. And so adjust on the fly.
Yeah. That was probably the biggest on the fly adjustment in terms of like really, drastic changes. you know, it's relatively easy to just like not shoot something. But that was probably the biggest change in like what we were actually deciding, what we were actually shooting.
And also, if I'm remembering correctly, and we'll talk about this in an upcoming episode, but chasing daylight, but then also there were other times where we had to deal with different location details. So I know one was getting pretty late at night, or we had to start the day a little bit later so we could get those really dark shots at night. Can you talk, like once we were in a particular scene, can you talk about how you try to manage your time that way? Like at what point did you say, look, we can't get any more shots, we just got to move on?
Well, the day that comes to mind with that was one where we were going over in one of our locations into like overtime, and realizing that like, well, one, we had like kind of like lost the light. We're like looking out a door that has a window through it, and it's obviously getting dark out there. So like the believability of it was going to be tough. So we had to find a way to make that work. And then, you know, we lost all ambient light inside. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a tough situation like that, you know, kind of taxed our lighting crew, which was that day like 2 people, but for a lot of the shoot it was just 1. It was just Max Eckstein. And yeah, I mean, we just kind of had to do the best with what we got.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think your question is like, at what point do you know, decide to just say, okay, that's it, move on? I mean,
right.
That can happen if, like we were saying before, like you've gotten those mandatory shots. So if you haven't gotten those, then it becomes like how much magic can you make with like a limited amount of lights and stuff like that. So big thanks to Jonathan and Max for making that happen. Another thing we did at various times was say, okay, well, we're gonna be here tomorrow, so we'll stop now. And then after the shoot's done today, we'll kind of think about how to reschedule tomorrow.
Yep.
To get this.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we'll wrap up here in just a moment, but I do want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the director and the DP. This was your first time working together. It was also your first time feature film. Did you feel like there was a lot of pressure? Talk about your relationship with each other. How did you communicate? How did you make those decisions? And, you know, were there any distractions that kind of prevented you from doing that? Or how did it work so well? Because for us that were working with you, it seemed to work very seamlessly, but maybe there was stuff we didn't see. I don't know.
There were actually not too many times where I feel like we couldn't come to an agreement. I think maybe like, yeah, basically none. I think most of the time it was just a matter of finding, like communicating what we need the most and figuring out like just what solutions we can come up with in the moment. Yeah, I think, and I would say that the amount of time that we put in, because right before the shoot, I think I had just met Doug virtually, and we ended up spending quite a bit of time just talking over the phone or over Zooms or just sharing documents just to like get our head wrapped around everything that we were going to need for this. And so by the time that we got into like a couple days of shooting, I feel like we had a good relationship, rapport to be able to kind of figure out like what we would need or want. Honestly, I feel like the first day was the roughest in that sense because we just hadn't started to kind of develop that working relationship. Yeah.
I mean, it would seem like a challenge that we hadn't worked together before, and I'm sure in some ways it was. But on the other hand, because of that, we knew that we didn't assume that we were on the same page. You know what I mean? Like it kind of forced us to talk through everything. Whereas if we'd done a bunch of shoots together before, we might not have thought that we needed to do that as much. So yeah, I mean, that's my thing. Number one is like talk, you know.
Over communicate.
We would set up Zoom meetings that were supposed to be like an hour and they would go like 3 or 4 just because we were talking in more and more detail.
Before the shoot, you mean?
Yeah. Well, and then actually after the after each shoot day too, everyone else would leave and we'd
It
stand
would
there
happen
and be
so
like, all right,
often.
well, let's just check in for tomorrow for like 15 minutes. And like an hour later, we're still standing there.
Yeah. Not a lot of
Yeah.
sleep during those days, but good communication, it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a big factor in that was that like we would start to talk about something like, oh yeah, so tomorrow we have this going on, and I was thinking about this. And he was like, oh, well, I was thinking about this, but then we like start to get into more of like the finer details of everything,
Mhm.
and we realize like, oh, well, we're actually not totally on the same page. And
Right.
I think yeah, it's a testament to like, well, Doug's temperament and communication ability. I feel like he's been one of the better directors I've ever worked with that can explain like where his head's at around a shot in a way that makes it very clear like where the breakdown in communication or understanding might be.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's great. Well, thank you both. I do
Megan,
have,
can I say
oh
one more
yes,
thing?
please go ahead.
Yeah. I heard this great quote somewhere, which is like, you need at least 3 filmmakers to make a film, like director, DP, and editor. And I feel like that's really, really true because, you know, on set, it's like tough situation, trying to decide what to do. It's like, I knew that I could turn to Jonathan and like, you know, even though it was our first time, we had a pretty good shorthand, and we could come up with something, and he could also think for the edit as well, which is super valuable. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, in one sentence or two, if you had to give any sort of advice to first-time DPs or first-time directors, what would you say? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think a first-time filmmaker, it can come from so many different backgrounds. You know, that person could be anyone. And so my advice would be to think about your past experience and how you've spent your life and career, and think about what parts of this are you likely to be really good at or pretty good at, and then try to fill in with other people who really know what they're doing in the other areas. And if you can't afford to pay them, then you got to inspire them as to why what you're doing, your project and your story is worth their hard work and time. So
that's good. Yeah. That's really good. Play to your strengths and inspire those that have strengths that you don't. That's awesome.
Yeah. One thing, like, I guess it's like a metaphor that I really like for it, that I've kind of like been thinking about a lot, is filmmaking and telling a story or anything like that, especially in like a position where you're like the lead or like a director of photography, anything like that, you are kind of like conducting a train, and you need to get everyone on board your train to like go towards the same direction. If you're kind of taking the lead on like what the shot is, like you have to get the director on board with what your decision is, or vice versa. And then like in the same way, like you have all this crew that kind of like relies on your decision making, and they have to trust that you know where you're going. So you I guess it would be like you have to like develop the confidence in yourself to know that the decisions that you're going to make are going to be the ones that get the story across that you want to get across. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really great. Thank you both for taking the time. We hope all of you watching have found this to be valuable, and we wish you all the best in your first film. Thank you both, Jonathan and Doug.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Bye.